check. Okay.
I heard the click
The metronome.
too. Yeah. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that Zoom is running. So, Grace, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me about Lee Konitz, the improviser, jazz musician who was clearly a big inspiration on both of us. Certainly for you, as you've recorded with him and performed with him in that wonderful video from the Newport Jazz Festival. So, can you tell me a little bit about what appeals to you about Lee's music?
I remember the first time that I heard the song Wow with Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh and Lenny Tristano, and it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before on the saxophone. And I was recently playing the saxophone at that point. I mean, maybe it was like 6 months in that I heard about Lee Konitz for the first time from my saxophone teacher. And I literally, after that song played, I think I said, wow. But it was just so perplexing to me. I was like, I don't know what this language is. I don't know what they're playing, but it's so fascinating and I want to hear more. And I fell in love with Lee Konitz's sound, and I just started to listen to so many of his records, and I just loved how fresh his approach sounded. It didn't sound like Charlie Parker, who I was transcribing and learning, or it didn't sound like Johnny Hodges. It was just the subtleness of the time feel and the tone that he would play with. And this was, way before I got to meet him in person and start studying with him. I never ever would have thought that I would spend so much time with one of my alto heroes, and he really changed my life, my musical perspective, my ideas, my improvisation, and I have him to thank to really I have Lee Konitz is so, his philosophies and his improvisation are so ingrained in me because of so many sessions that we played together and moments that we shared. And to me, he is one of the most pure improvisers on the saxophone. And he was like that as a person as well.
That's exactly the phrase I use too. I consider him one of the greatest pure improvisers of the 20th century, 21st
Absolutely.
century as well. I mean, of the history of recorded music, really. He's one of the greatest pure improvisers.
Yes. You'll never hear him play licks. I mean, it's incredible. And I remember studying with him, and we would often play these spontaneous, impromptu 2 alto duets, and I just never knew where it was going to go, and he never knew where it was going to go. And he was the first person who really said to me, leave your licks for the practice room, and when you go on stage and when we play together, just open up your ears, and I want you to truly improvise. Because up to that point, I was studying with different teachers, and a lot of the methods that those teachers were teaching me was play this lick, transpose it, and Lee really freed me from that idea of having to come with an agenda to the music table. And he really embodied that from all his recordings.
So you talked about this a little already, but are there some aspects of Lee's approach that you learned or that you use in your own improvisation?
Absolutely. I think that the way that Lee would always use the melody as the driving force is huge, and I picked up on that from from our first sessions together of what an incredible melodic player he was. And so to me, that's always ingrained in my solos. I always want it to be rooted to the melody. I always want to have, a line to the form, to the melody. And we spend much time working on playing a melody and adding different variations to it in his 10-step method. And I remember the first time he presented that idea, and I had no idea how to embellish a melody with all these subtle cues that he was talking about. And it seems like a simple concept, but it's so complex. And it's one of those things that continues to just feed, more and more and get more, the more you jump into this idea of his melodic playing, the more you discover. And the other thing that really has always stuck with me is in one of the first meetings with Lee, when I was so nervous to play for him. I played the standard, All the Things You Are, and he said, "Oh, I love that standard. I've been playing it, my whole life, and I still feel like every time I play it, it's a new version, and let's play it together." And here I was talking to this jazz master who's saying he's still working on All the Things You Are. And that was a huge lesson for me. So I think when I play and when I work on standards, even if it's one that I feel I know well, it's that freshness that I can go into a song and see it in a new light, and try to approach it in a new way, and try to really open up my ears to the other musicians that I'm playing with and to interact with them. To me, that was something that I got to experience firsthand with Lee. We would often just create free improvisations together, and it's one of my favorite things to do to this day with another musician or a group of musicians.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, me too.
It's a beautiful. You never know where it's going to go.
I have this great memory. I went to Colorado back when I was a student, and I got to do that. There was a clinician, a wonderful pianist named Art Landy, and he's just absolute guru, master of improvisation. Lives out in the Denver area, and in his clinic he had just invited anyone. Just anyone want to just play duo? I said, yeah, sure. So I just played duo with him, and we did the same thing. We just started playing, and it was so fun. It was so beautiful, and he's a wonderful, wonderful musician too.
Oh, I love that. And I've seen video clips of Bobby McFerrin bringing up audience members, people who will literally raise their hand, and then he'll create a piece of improvisation with that person, no matter what their vocal level is or if they can keep a tune, which just shows you how improvisation, it's so powerful because you're celebrating being in the moment and working with your teammate to whoever you're playing with and whatever comes up in that moment. And there's not a lot of other practices, I feel, that center us so much in that present moment.
You sort of already talked about this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway in case it brings up anything else, okay?
Yeah.
So my book and these videos is about learning to improvise using melodic embellishment, taking a simple melody as a point of departure and applying techniques to embellish it systematically. How do you think about melodicism or embellishment?
That's a great question. I love to really internalize the melody. And to me, if I can always be singing that melody even while I'm playing a solo, it ensures that I'll never lose the form. It's kind of like a home base. And it just gives me the inspiration to pull improvisation from that place. So, before I really dive into improvising on a song, I'll listen to a lot of different versions. I'll fill a whole playlist of one song and all these different artists who've performed it, sung it, played it, all sorts of instruments and singers. And then I'll just actively listen to that playlist so many times, all before touching the sax. And if it has words, I'll learn the words to the melody. I really like to just get as intimate as possible with that melody and how people phrase around it, what is the meaning of the song. And after I get to a point where I really feel like I know the song well, then I'll just work on the melody and I'll work on, how can I change up the phrasing of this melody and where does it feel right to add some embellishments. And a lot of times the words, if it's a song that has great lyrics and original lyrics, will tell me where those embellishments are meant to be played. Because instead of cutting off a word, and taking a breath, I would know, okay, I got to play through that line because that is, a full lyric. And that's something that another alto hero of mine, Phil Woods, talked to me about. Know the lyrics of the song. Know what you're playing about. Sing it through your sax. And then I'll know, okay, here's the end of that phrase and the words. So here's where I can input some of my, embellishments. And that's usually my process for really getting to know a melody.
That's so great, because that's so great because I remember when you were a guest artist, when you came to Ithaca College and performed with the jazz ensemble, you did sing, and you played a lot of saxophone, but you also sang maybe one or two songs. Do you have any other thoughts about the importance of singing for an instrumentalist, or vice versa, the importance of playing an instrument for a singer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all instrumentalists should also sing. Whether you consider yourself a singer or whether you can't hold a pitch, it doesn't really matter, because you can be singing inside in your head as you're playing the instrument and creating that connection, and with your ears, with your brain, and then with your fingers is going to fill in a lot of the blanks of what do I play where. If you just focus on the notes and the theory and the technique, it can often feel like you feel like you need to play these buttons because it goes in this scale and you're not actually hearing what you're playing. And then it can actually become this very anxiety-inducing thing of, I always need to play a million notes to show off, versus knowing what you're playing about. So I really encourage anybody who's an instrumentalist to put the horn aside and to literally sing the song, or at least you can even speak it like a poem. And I love to write down the lyrics too, and research the history of a song. Why was it written? Who was it written about? What's the time period? What does this mean to me in my life? And just get, it's really about creating a connection. And when I sing, I'm playing the saxophone in my head. So it's very interchangeable for me. And the more that you can really practice singing, the more you can strengthen your ear, the more you'll be able to understand the theory that you're learning and what the notes mean and how they connect, and be able to play a melodic solo. And also, it'll better help you understand when you're playing complex changes like giant steps, how can you connect all of those chords in like a melodic way with a guide tone line. Instead of it just being this written exercise, it's going to be something you actually hear in your head and that you've been singing. And if you can sit down and play the piano and play the chords and sing it and embody it, I 100% promise that's going to come through in your playing. It is the best thing you can add to your practice session. It is definitely not a waste of time.
That's great, Grace. I think I put it in my course syllabi every year, and I think I put it in the book too. I said Louis Armstrong was neither only the greatest jazz trumpet player nor the greatest jazz singer. He was neither the greatest trumpet player who sang nor the greatest singer who played trumpet. He was the greatest jazz musician who played trumpet and sang.
Yes.
They were the both integral parts of his musicianship, and they both come out of his. It's just music that exudes whether he's singing or playing an instrument.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's what I loved about your playing too. And when you were a guest, not just your playing, but you're playing and you're singing. It just seemed like it was you who just made music.
Well, thank you. I think it's a very freeing thing, because I've worked with a bunch of students that I think get so worried about what notes they're playing and if they're playing the right notes and what are the right notes to play. And it's a very heady, philosophical, you're all in your head of figuring that out. So if you can start to embody these things more, which singing will definitely help, then it just feels like there's less pressure and there's more music making.
That's great. So I had another question, and it goes sort of back to Lee. Now that he's passed away, how do you look back on your history with him, or perhaps even your place in the history of jazz and music, having performed and recorded with him?
I feel very, very lucky. I feel so grateful for the time we spent together, and I think Lee saw something in me when he first heard me playing, and whatever he saw, I'm so grateful that he wanted to continue our relationship. I remember the first time that I got to perform in front of him, I was so nervous. He's one of my alto heroes. And I really thought, I'm going to take my picture and I'm going to leave. And this is going to be like one of the greatest days of my life. And I'll always remember this moment. And then after I performed for him, he said, I'd like to see you every time you come to New York. And I'd like to, come by and play for me. And I'd like to hear you. And that kind of spiraled. And then at one point he said, I want you to sit in with me at the Jazz Gallery. And it's just, I had never performed in New York. I just couldn't believe that he was inviting me to do that. And I learned I would not be the musician that I am today without the lessons that he taught me. And at any moment that it comes up and that I'm thinking about when I think about how I want to teach others and in my lessons, or if I'm coming across a very talented young saxophonist, I like to pass on these messages, the things that I learned from him, the art of improvisation, of spontaneity, of being in the moment. And he is dearly missed. I loved hanging out with Lee. He was so quirky, and you just never knew what he was going to say. I felt like I was always on my toes. I had so many dinners where, it was with my parents and him, and we'd go to the Blue Note, and we actually became very close personally. We hang out at his apartment for hours. We go see other saxophone master classes. He was always learning every single day, and he would be the one who'd say, you want to go see Chris Potter's master class? And you can imagine that any of the people that we went to see were always just so blown away and nervous, and so much admired Lee, who was in the audience. But he really had that playful energy. He was always learning, and he was always curious. And watching how he acted and how he went about his life was very inspiring, and still things that I think about today. I remember when it was like the night before our recording, the Graceful Lee album, I asked him, what are you going to wear? Just so, we can kind of plan the colors, and we were going to also have a photo shoot. And I, just was thinking about those things ahead of time. And he said, I don't know. I'm not going to know until the moment that, I put on a shirt and leave the house. And I was like, oh, okay. And so he really lived and breathed improvisation in every moment. Or he'd talk about, I just went for a walk and I saw this beautiful, I saw this baby and this mom, and he'd tell me about that, and he'd be listening to records. And I just, I was so inspired by the way that he lived his life, and in the moments that we got to talk about that and share that. And one more thing that really comes to mind, he never liked to call our lessons. He would call them music conferences.
Oh.
Yeah, and even at his incredible, legendary place in his life and his status, and I was there eagerly waiting to learn everything he was going to teach me, he still, and this goes to show how much of a learner and curious mindset he was kind of just discussing things with me without saying, this is the right way, or this is what you need to learn. We also used to write a lot of physical letters to each other, and he would tell me to define certain things, like what is a bend, and how does that make you feel, and why would you do that there, and just questions and things that I had never thought about. And he'd go, I think that bend sounds kind of schmaltzy, Can you do it a different way? And why would you play it there? And I really always appreciate that he opened up that conversation in our music conferences.
Wow, that's so cool.
It was. I honestly, I just feel so gosh darn lucky that I got to spend those moments with him.
You reminded me of something which I hadn't thought about in a while, that I felt like I had to really be on my toes too when he came as a guest. And I was a little older than you, I suspect. I was 21 or 22, whatever year that was. I was at school, and I remember the master class that he was giving. We were all just sitting at a table. We didn't have our instruments, and I remember he knew I was the alto player who thought the most of himself, I'm sure, at the time. I thought so I remember, we were just talking, and at one point he just looks right at me from across the table. He was sitting across the table. It was a conference table, and he looked at me and he said, "Sing me your favorite solo." I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "What solos you been learning?" So I said, well, I've been
Wow.
learning a Charlie Parker solo as Blues for Alice, and I've been working on it and doing it in all 12 keys. He's like, okay, we'll sing it. So I sang about the first chorus in a quarter, and then just crashed. And then he responded by singing one Louis Armstrong solo after another. He just sang one right after another, just a bunch of them in a row.
Wow.
And then he said, it's not about having your fingers do the thinking for you. It's about you exuding music. And I don't even remember what he said after that. All I remember was that he just sang a bunch, one after another. And I just vowed, I said, I will never be unprepared for that again.
Wow.
So I learned a bunch of Louis Armstrong solos to sing after that.
That's amazing. I remember when one of the first times that I was meeting with him, he said, I want you to come back and learn that Lester Young solo, Lester Leaps In. I want you to sing it, and I want you to write it, and I want you to play it. And yeah, I loved how in performances sometimes, and in practice sessions or duet sessions, Lee would just start singing. He'd doobie-dabby, doobie-dabby-da, doobie-dabby. He always had these funny syllables. And sometimes, like in that Newport Jazz Festival clip that we performed together, he'd have these very quirky, funny moments, and the audience would be laughing. And I think he loved those moments. But yeah, I love that story. Wow. He really put you on the spot.
He did, yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, it wasn't on stage. It was just in a conference room, but in the school. But
Yeah.
but now I gotta pull out the recording of the concert. Someone found it a couple months ago. They found I had one track from that concert, but I didn't have the whole thing, and someone found it, and so I was listening to
Wow.
it. Yeah,
Oh, that's so special.
yeah. So, anything else you want to add about Lee, about improvisation, about melody, about anything?
No, I mean, I loved your questions. To me, I guess I already covered this, but something that I just really found so fascinating in the years that I got to know him is how much his improvisation connected to who he was as a person and his personality. That same quirkiness and never knowing what Lee was going to say next, whether it was telling someone at the restaurant to please stop talking so loudly, or plenty of moments that were like, and then he would say, oh, I'm sorry for saying that, or could they change the music? You just never knew what he was going to say, or he's talking about a saxophonist or a song. That type of improvisation and spontaneity would come out in his playing, and I just found a very fascinating process to get to know him as a person more, and then listen to his music and be like, that's so him, And I think that's something that is a great reminder for all of us when we're playing our instruments. Like, the goal is for you to be you, and for your expression and your personality to come out in your playing, whether that's your humor or your self-consciousness, or your fears or your joys. And to me, that's really like, if you can get there at the level that he was, with being truly himself when he played, then that's the ultimate, right? Because we all want to be able to put on a recording and say, and know who that is within a bar. I feel like if you can do that, if people know who you are within a bar, and they know your sound and they know you, then you're really touching your listener on such an emotional level. And so that's something that, I'll strive for the rest of my life, and that he really reminded me of. And I found a beautiful process of learning while getting to know him, and deepening my, love for his music. And he's definitely very, very missed. He brought so much, he gave so much to the music world and into the saxophone world, and really created such a language. And luckily his music will always live on, and we can always appreciate and remember him. And that's a beautiful thing about these recordings.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Grace.
Yeah, you're so welcome, Mike. Thanks for asking, and I'm really looking forward to your book.
Oh, thanks.